My name is Lindsay Stewart and I'm 32 years old. Last weekend at a family party, a single sentence I whispered to my sister turned the whole night upside down. Within minutes, whispers spread, faces changed, and I realized just how quickly trust can crumble when money's on the table. By the end of the night, I wasn't sure which was louder, the music or the sound of my own heartbeat. Before I tell you what happened and why my phone wouldn't stop ringing the next morning, I want to know what time is it where you are, and which city are you listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And then, someone made a move I'll never forget, one that would change the way I looked at my own family forever. Before that fateful weekend, my life in Albuquerque was as predictable as the New Mexico sunsets, beautiful from afar, but scorching up close. I worked as an elementary school teacher at a local public school, spending my days wrangling second graders through math lessons and recess chaos. My paycheck barely stretched to cover rent on a one-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood near the Rio Grande, where I'd brew cheap coffee each morning and check my bank app for overdraft alerts. I'd drive my 12-year-old Toyota Corolla to work, praying it wouldn't break down again after the last repair bill wiped out my savings. Family made everything more complicated. My parents, James and Susan Stewart, divorced when I was 12, turning our home into a battleground of custody fights and blame. James, a civil engineer with a steady job, remarried Pamela Hart, a marketing consultant who loved expensive wines and weekend getaways, but never quite embraced me as family. Susan, who managed a small boutique downtown, found stability with Roger Bennett, a real estate agent who guarded his wallet like a fortress. My older brother Thomas, 36, put on a show of success with his tech startup pitches, but he was always calling for loans that turned into gifts. My younger sister Danielle, 28, was the star top of her class, married to Mark Taylor, a surgeon living in a gated community with their kids and a life that looked perfect on social media. The aunts added their own flavor. Aunt Diane Moore, Susan's younger sister, was the genuine one, a retired librarian on a fixed income in a modest condo filled with secondhand books and herbal teas. She battled heart problems but always made time for calls or cards, never asking for anything. On the other side was Aunt Karen Wright, James's older sister, who married into money and never let us forget it, critiquing my career choices at holidays. Her daughter, Emily. My cousin acted friendly during visits, sharing gossip over coffee, but I later discovered she fed every detail back to Aunt Karen like a personal informant. Extended relationships were just as tangled. I'd given Thomas $3,000 last year for what he called a business emergency, only to find out it funded a ski trip he posted online. Danielle borrowed $1,500 for her baby's nursery, swearing she'd pay after her promotion, but 5 months later, silence. James needed $2,000 for home repairs after a storm, and I sent it from my credit card, then saw photos of him and Pamela cruising the Caribbean. Susan hit me up for $500 to cover a boutique shortfall, promising quick repayment that vanished when Roger bought new golf gear. These weren't isolated incidents, they formed a pattern that left me jaded and constantly calculating who might ask next. My best friend, Christina Long, a nurse I met in college, was the one constant. She'd listen over wine at her place, saying things like, "Lindsay, you can't keep being their bank," and help me see I wasn't crazy for feeling used. At work, colleague Brian Kelly had a subtle crush, bringing me lunch or offering to cover playground duty, but I kept it friendly. He was kind, but I wasn't ready for more complications. My small indulgence was lottery tickets bought every Friday at John Adams's corner store near school. John, the owner in his 60s, knew my routine and chatted about weather or local news. Family mocked it. Susan said it was a fool's game. Thomas joked I should just give him the money. James lectured on statistics. I had dreams, though, traveling to the Grand Canyon without worrying about costs, clearing student loans that lingered like shadows, maybe getting a certification to teach higher grades. But at 32, with persistent credit debt from family loans and monthly budgeting down to the penny, those felt like distant mirages. I'd compare prices at grocery stores, skip social invites to save gas, and master the art of smiling through stress, wondering if I'd ever break the cycle. Little did I know, a simple stop at John's store on my birthday would shatter that routine in ways I couldn't imagine. That birthday Friday started like any other bad day at school. A student had a meltdown during reading time, parents emailed complaints about grading, and I spent lunch grading papers instead of eating. Brian Kelly noticed my stress and said, "Lindsay, you look like you need a break. Want to join me for coffee after?" I appreciated the gesture but waved it off, too exhausted to think about his obvious crush. After the bell, I headed straight to John Adams's corner store, my weekly ritual. John greeted me with his usual nod and asked, "Tough week." "The usual tickets." I nodded, handing over $10, but on a whim, I asked for one extra and chose the numbers myself instead of quick pick. John glanced at the numbers I picked: my birth month and day, Susan's birthday, James's, Aunt Diane's, and Christina's, and smiled oddly, saying, "Those look familiar. You know, your grandma used similar ones back in the day. She had stories about family inheritances that got lost in the shuffle." I chuckled, thinking it was just small talk, but his words stuck with me as I drove home. That evening, I treated myself to takeout from a local Mexican spot and opened a bottle of wine Christina had gifted. The lottery drawing aired at 8 p.m., but I barely paid attention at first, scrolling through family photos on my phone, Danielle's perfect kids, Thomas's fake success posts, Aunt Karen's luxury vacation pics. Then the numbers flashed. First matched my birth date, then Susan's, James's, Aunt Diane's, Christina's. My heart skipped as the last one lined up. I froze wine glass halfway to my mouth and checked the ticket against the screen 3 times, hands shaking so badly I dropped my phone. No way, this couldn't be real. The website confirmed it. I was the sole winner of $50 million. After taxes, it'd be around $30 million, a number that made my head spin for someone who'd celebrated a $20 win last year like it was Christmas. Sleep evaded me that night. Instead, I paced the apartment, searching online for stories of lottery winners. What I found terrified me. Families ripped apart by greed, relatives crawling out with sob stories, winners bankrupt and miserable within years. One article described it as the fastest way to lose everything you value. As dawn broke over the Sandia Mountains, I made my choice. I'd claim the prize, but tell no one. Not Susan, not James, not even Christina yet. I needed time to plan, to build protections before anyone could turn me into their personal cash machine. The idea of testing their loyalty started forming then, but first I had to secure the money without a trace. The next morning, after discovering the win, I called in sick to school for the first time in months, citing a migraine that wasn't entirely a lie. My head was pounding from the overnight whirlwind. I scheduled an appointment with David Cole, a financial attorney specializing in large windfalls and estate planning, whose office was in a sleek downtown Albuquerque building. As I sat in the waiting room, clutching my purse with the ticket inside, dressed in my everyday clothes, I felt like a fraud among the suited clients. David greeted me warmly, a man in his 50s with graying hair and sharp eyes, and asked, "What can I do for you today, Lindsay?" I took a deep breath and slid the ticket across his desk, explaining the situation without naming the amount at first. His eyes widened slightly as he verified it. Then he leaned back and nodded professionally. "Congratulations, but I see why you're here quietly. In New Mexico, winners can claim through a trust to keep identities private." Over the next hour, David outlined the process: setting up a blind trust to anonymize the claim, handling federal and state taxes that would reduce it to about $30 million, and building a diversified investment plan with stocks, bonds, and real estate to grow it safely. He warned, "The biggest pitfall is telling family too soon. They'll see you as a resource, not a person. I've seen it destroy relationships overnight." I nodded, relieved my instincts were right, and we discussed immediate steps: wiring funds to secure accounts, avoiding lifestyle changes that could raise suspicions. Leaving his office with a folder of documents, I felt a strange mix of power and isolation. The money was mine, but I couldn't celebrate it. Back home, I continued my routine, driving the old Toyota to the grocery store, complaining about bills in texts with Christina to maintain the facade. That evening, I met Christina for dinner at a casual spot near Old Town, and after some small talk, I shared the partial truth about the win and my growing idea to test the family. "I'm thinking of creating a scenario to see who'd help me if I needed it," I said, watching her reaction. Christina raised an eyebrow, concerned. "Lindsay, that sounds manipulative. Why not just have honest conversations?" I explained the history of one-sided help, how I'd been the giver but doubted reciprocity. She sighed, but understood, saying, "If you're set on this, let's make it believable." We spent the next hour practicing. I'd start with a fake $1 million ticket at the upcoming family party to gauge greed, then follow up by pretending to need $4,000 for medical bills and rent after the loss. Christina helped refine details, mention a sudden company audit at school for realism, even though I was a teacher. I made notes on predictions. Thomas would promise, big, but ghost. Danielle would cite kids' expenses. James would lecture on responsibility, but might slip about the inheritance grandma left that mysteriously vanished. Susan would deflect to others. Aunt Karen would judge. Emily would pretend to help, then report back Pamela, and Roger would outright refuse. As we parted, the party loomed like a storm on the horizon, my nerves buzzing with anticipation of what it might reveal. With the plan solidified and the fake ticket printed to look authentic, I spent the days leading up to the family party organizing details. The gathering was at Aunt Karen's spacious house in the outer suburbs of Albuquerque, a place with a large backyard perfect for barbecues and games, though it always felt more like a stage for showing off than a real reunion. I arrived early to help set up, carrying a dish of homemade enchiladas to blend in my nerves, hidden behind a smile. As guests trickled in the air, filled with the sizzle of burgers on the grill, and kids running around, Danielle's little ones chasing butterflies, while Thomas chatted up Roger about some investment scheme. Pamela and Roger made their entrance, first Pamela in a flashy sundress, commenting on my casual look, as if it were a flaw, and Roger grumbling about traffic from their upscale neighborhood. "Lindsay, you should upgrade that car of yours," Pamela said with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. I nodded politely, biting back a retort. Soon, Dad and Susan arrived together for the kids' sake, Dad shaking hands stiffly with Roger while Mom hugged me briefly, asking about work in that surface-level way. Aunt Karen bustled around, directing everyone, her voice sharp as she critiqued the food setup. Emily hovered nearby, smiling sweetly and offering to help with plates, but I caught her glancing at my phone curiously. The party picked up as Mark and Danielle showed up with their family, Mark clapping Thomas on the back like old pals. Brandon Chen arrived unexpectedly. He'd been viewing my apartment earlier that week as a potential buyer, and Christina had suggested inviting him for a casual network, though I hadn't expected him to come. Brandon, a 32-year-old real estate flipper with an easy charm, started talking to Emily about property values, and she flirted openly, laughing at his jokes, while Mark shot jealous glances from across the yard. Roger even joined in, ribbing Mark about competition, escalating the tension with his own competitive streak. As the sun dipped lower, I pulled Danielle aside near the picnic table, away from the main group. "Hey sis, I have to tell you something huge. I just won a $1 million ticket," I whispered, showing her the fake slip. Her eyes lit up like fireworks and she grabbed it, muttering, "No way, let me see that closer." Before I could react, she slipped it into her pocket and vanished into the house, saying she needed the bathroom. I waited, pretending to mingle, but my stomach twisted as minutes passed. Emily approached, then acting concerned. "You okay? You look distracted." I brushed it off, but later I'd learned she texted Aunt Karen and Pamela right away, spilling what she'd overheard. The party wound down amid awkward goodbyes, with me faking worry about losing the ticket to gauge reactions. Dad patted my shoulder, saying, "If it's gone, it's a lesson in caution," while Mom suggested checking my purse again. Pamela smirked, "Sounds careless," and Roger chuckled, "Better luck next time." Brandon pulled me aside, briefly mentioning, "Hey, when I looked at your place, I saw some old family papers in the attic, stuff about debts from your dad. Thought you should know." His words hit like a punch, confirming suspicions about the hidden inheritance, but I thanked him quietly as he left. Driving home, my phone buzzed. It was Mark, his voice booming with that forced, hearty laugh. "Lindsay heard about your big win from Danielle. If you don't split it with us, say half for the family, I'll just throw it away. You know, for fun." The threat hung there, laced with greed, his jealousy over Emily's flirting with Brandon bubbling under. I smiled into the empty car and hung up, knowing the ticket was worthless paper. But the betrayal stung deeper than expected, especially with Emily's role in spreading the word and Pamela's quick judgment. As the city lights of Albuquerque flickered by, I realized this was just the beginning. Their actions had sealed my resolve to push the test further, uncovering layers of deceit I hadn't fully anticipated. The morning after the party, my phone was a war zone. 30 missed calls, half from Danielle, a few from Mark, even one from Aunt Karen, all before 7 a.m. Voicemails piled up, Danielle's voice frantic. "Lindsay, where's the ticket? Did you find it?" And Mark's smug, "Call me back, we need to talk about that million." I ignored them, my resolve hardening as I sipped coffee in my quiet Albuquerque apartment, the fake ticket drama already exposing their greed. To push the test further, I crafted a new story. The ticket was stolen, leaving me desperate for $4,000 to cover rent and medical bills from a recent health scare. I sent texts to the family, voice trembling in crafted distress, and waited to see who'd step up. First, I called Dad. He picked up on the second ring, his tone already lecturing. "Lindsay, I heard about the ticket mess from Karen. This is why I always said to be careful with valuables." I explained the theft and my need for $4,000, mentioning hospital tests for chest pains. He sighed heavily, slipping into his engineer logic. "You should have had a safety net. I warned you about living paycheck to paycheck." Then, unprompted, he let slip, "Your grandma's inheritance was supposed to be that safety net, but it got complicated." My heart stopped. Brian Kelly had helped me dig into old records after Brandon's attic hint, confirming Dad hid Grandma's $20,000 bequest for his own projects. "Dad? What do you mean complicated?" I pressed, voice sharp. He stammered. "It was for family investments. Lindsay, not personal use," but his defensiveness gave him away. The call ended with him promising to think about helping, but no commitment. Next was Mom. She answered distractedly mid-conversation with Roger. "Oh, Lindsay, Danielle told me about the ticket chaos. That's awful." I laid out the same story, but she cut me off. "Have you asked your dad? Roger and I just sank money into the boutique's expansion." When I mentioned the inheritance, her voice tightened. "What are you implying? That money was handled years ago." But her quick denial and shaky tone betrayed her. She knew about Dad's scheme and covered it. She promised to check with Roger, but suggested I try Thomas instead, passing the buck like always. Thomas was predictable. I texted him the story, and he replied instantly, "Sis, that sucks, I'll see what I can do." But days passed with no follow-up, his usual ghosting tactic after empty promises. I left voicemails, but they went unanswered, just like the $3,000 I'd lent him last year. Aunt Karen was worse. Her call was a lecture. "Lindsay, Emily told me you were careless with that ticket. I always said teaching wasn't stable." When I asked for help, she scoffed. "You should have taken a corporate job like I suggested." Later, I found a text from Emily to Aunt Karen sent during the party, detailing my win and mocking my distress. She'd played the loyal cousin while feeding Karen ammo to judge me. Danielle and Mark were a united front of refusal. Mark texted, "We can't help kids' school fees are killing us." Danielle called later, voice syrupy with fake sympathy. "Lindsay, I'm so sorry about the ticket. Maybe it'll turn up. We're tight with the new house." Their rejection stung, especially after Mark's threat to toss the fake ticket and Danielle's grab and run at the party. Pamela and Roger were blunt in their group text reply. "Sorry, Lindsay. We don't have spare cash for your mistakes. Maybe downsize that apartment." Their dismissal echoed Pamela's snide party comments, and Roger's mention of mistakes felt like a jab at my entire life. As the week unfolded, I jotted their responses in a notebook, each one a fresh cut. Brian, who'd been texting to check on me, offered to dig deeper into Dad's financial records, confirming the inheritance was funneled into a failed business venture with Pamela's input. The family's excuses, deflections, and outright lies piled up, but the real blow was Emily's betrayal. Her texts proved she'd orchestrated the gossip to curry favor with Aunt Karen. As I stared at my phone, notifications still buzzing from Danielle's desperate follow-ups about the lost ticket, I knew the next call would either break me or show me who my real family was. By the end of that week, the sting of my family's responses, or lack thereof, had left me drained, my notebook filled with their excuses and betrayals. I was about to call Aunt Diane Moore, the one person I hadn't reached out to yet, when my phone buzzed with her name. "Lindsay, honey, I just heard from Susan about your trouble with that ticket." She said, her voice warm with worry despite her own struggles. Aunt Diane, a retired librarian living on a meager pension in a small Albuquerque condo, had been battling heart issues for years, yet she was the first to check on me without prompting. "Are you okay? Do you need anything?" Her concern, so genuine, cracked something in me. I met her the next day at a quiet diner near her place, a spot with worn booths and the smell of fresh coffee. She looked tired, her gray hair tied back, wearing a simple sweater with a mismatched scarf, but her smile was bright as she hugged me tightly. Over pancakes, I spilled the fake story about the stolen ticket and needing $4,000 for rent and medical bills. Without hesitation, she reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "This is $2,500, she said, sliding it across the table. "It's most of what I've saved, but it should help with rent. Don't worry about paying it back until you're steady." I stared at the envelope, stunned. She was scraping by her meds, eating up her budget, yet she gave without a second thought. The weight of her kindness hit hard, and I couldn't keep up the lie. "Aunt Diane, I need to tell you the truth," I said, my voice shaking. "I didn't lose a ticket. I won $50 million in the lottery last week. The $1 million ticket was fake, a test to see who'd show up for me." Her eyes widened, but she stayed quiet, letting me continue. "I've been burned so many times by family, I had to know who cared. You're the only one who did without even knowing the stakes." Tears welled up as I told her about the party, Danielle's theft, Mark's threat, Emily's gossip to Aunt Karen, and the others' cold refusals. Then Aunt Diane leaned forward, her expression somber. "Lindsay, there's something you should know about your family." She took a deep breath. "Your grandma left an inheritance, $20,000, meant for you and your siblings. James redirected it to a business deal with Pamela, claiming it was for family benefit. Susan knew but kept quiet to avoid conflict with Roger. I tried to speak up, but they shut me out." Her words confirmed what Brian's research and Brandon's attic find had hinted at, and the betrayal cut deeper, knowing it was deliberate. "I never told you because I didn't want to tear the family apart," she added, squeezing my hand. "But you deserve the truth." I hugged her, tears streaming, overwhelmed by her selflessness and the clarity her words brought. "I'm going to help you," I said. "Your medical bill's a better place to live, whatever you need." She shook her head gently, but I insisted, already picturing a small, accessible home near mine and a fund to cover her treatments. As we left the diner, her arm linked with mine, I felt a resolve solidify. The family's lies, Danielle's greed, Emily's duplicity, James and Susan's cover-up had shown me who they were. Aunt Diane was my true family, and I'd cut everyone else out for good, no looking back. The weight of that decision felt heavy but right, like shedding a burden I'd carried too long. A year after that pivotal week, my life in Albuquerque was unrecognizable. I'd moved into a modest but cozy home in a quiet suburb with a small garden, where I'd sip coffee each morning, no longer checking my bank account with dread. The $50 million safely tucked into a blind trust managed by David Cole gave me freedom I'd never known, but it was the clarity from Aunt Diane's honesty that reshaped everything. I'd blocked every family member who'd failed my test: Danielle, Mark, Thomas, James, Susan, Aunt Karen, Emily, Pamela, Roger. No calls, no texts, no exceptions. When Thomas messaged about a new business venture needing $5,000 or Danielle complained about private school fees, I didn't respond. Their silence when I'd needed them echoed louder than their sudden pleas. With David's help, I set up a trust for Aunt Diane, covering her medical bills and buying her a single-story house nearby with wide doorways for her heart-related mobility issues. Her health improved, her smile brighter as she tended a small herb garden. "You didn't have to do this, Lindsay," she'd say during our weekly dinners, but I knew she deserved every bit of it. Inspired by her, I founded a nonprofit focused on supporting low-income teachers and elderly folks living alone, providing grants for bills and home repairs. Christina joined as program coordinator, her nursing skills perfect for outreach, while Brian Kelly volunteered, his crush long faded into friendship. Brandon Chen, who'd tipped me off about the family papers, helped manage the nonprofit's real estate needs, his insights proving invaluable. Even John Adams, the corner store owner, pitched in, sharing stories of his own family's struggles to guide our mission. The nonprofit grew fast, helping over 150 people in its first year, teachers like me, who'd lived paycheck to paycheck, seniors like Aunt Diane, who'd been forgotten by their own. We'd sit on my porch, Christina, Aunt Diane, and I, planning fundraisers over wine, laughing in a way I'd never done with my blood family. The work filled a void I hadn't realized was there, replacing the constant anxiety of pleasing people who never valued me. My old life, scrimping on groceries, dodging family demands, felt like a distant memory. Cutting off my family wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The truth about the inheritance, James funneling Grandma's $20,000 into his failed ventures with Pamela, Susan's complicity to keep peace with Roger, had shattered any lingering hope. Danielle's theft of the fake ticket, Mark's greedy threat, Emily's betrayal through texts to Aunt Karen, and the collective dismissal of my plea for $4,000 showed their priorities. They didn't deserve a place in my new life, and I refused to play their game of half-hearted apologies or fake concern. When James had a car accident and faced repair costs, I didn't step in. When Danielle texted about a family reunion, I left it unread. My peace was worth more than their validation. Looking back, the money didn't change who I was, it revealed who they were. It taught me that family isn't blood. It's the people who show up without expecting a payout. Aunt Diane, with her $2,500 and her painful truth about the inheritance, gave me more than millions could. She showed me love doesn't keep a ledger. I learned to walk away from toxic ties, to build a life on my terms, and to find purpose in helping others who'd been overlooked. If you're listening, ask yourself who's there for you when you have nothing to give. Those are your people. Don't waste energy on those who only see you as a means to an end. Thank you for hearing my story. If it hit home, please like, subscribe, and drop a comment below, sharing your own experiences with loyalty tests or family betrayals. I'd love to hear how you've navigated those tough moments and found your true circle.
"You're clearly paranoid and unstable," Dennis Caldwell said, leaning back in his leather chair, with that same condescending smile I'd seen him use on vendors who questioned his invoices. "Nobody will believe a word you say." I stood in his corner office in Denver, Colorado, holding a manila folder that contained enough evidence to end his career. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across his mahogany desk. and I could hear the distant hum of our accounting department wrapping up another day at Gravora Group, the mid-sized manufacturing company where I'd spent the last 12 years of my life. "Dennis, the numbers don't lie," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "The pension fund is missing $200,000, and every withdrawal traces back to your authorization codes." His laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Monica, you've been under a lot of stress lately. Maybe you should take some time off, get your head straight." The patronizing tone made my jaw clench. I was 46 years old, had managed payroll and employee benefits with zero discrepancies for over a decade, and he was treating me like an hysterical child. But something in his eyes told me this conversation was about to take a very different turn than I'd hoped. "I've triple-checked everything," I continued, opening the folder to show him the printed spreadsheets. The quarterly audit flagged these transactions, and when I dug deeper— "When you what?" Dennis stood abruptly, his face flushing red. "You went digging through confidential financial records without authorization? That's a serious violation of company policy, Monica." My heart started racing, but not from fear, from anger. This man had been stealing from our employees' retirement funds, money that belonged to people like Janet in shipping, who was 3 years from retirement, or Carlos in maintenance, who'd been faithfully contributing for 8 years. And he had the audacity to turn this around on me. "Those records are part of my job responsibilities," I said, keeping my voice level. "Managing the pension fund distributions falls under—" "Not anymore, it doesn't." Dennis picked up his phone. "Security? Yes, I need an escort to human resources. We have a terminated employee who needs to be walked out immediately." The word "terminated" hit me like a physical blow. In all my years at Gravora Group, I'd never even received a written warning. My performance reviews were consistently excellent. I'd caught a major payroll error 2 years ago that saved the company $50,000. And now, because I'd discovered his theft, I was being fired. But as I watched Dennis hang up the phone with a satisfied smirk, I realized something important. He'd just made a catastrophic mistake. 20 minutes later, I was clearing out my desk, while a stone-faced security guard watched my every move. The entire accounting department had gone silent, their eyes following me as I packed 12 years of my professional life into a cardboard box. Dennis had announced to everyone that I was being let go for performance issues and violation of confidentiality protocols, painting me as an untrustworthy employee who'd overstepped her bounds. I could see the confusion in my colleagues' faces. Jennifer, my closest work friend, kept glancing between me and Dennis's office with obvious bewilderment. We'd had lunch together just yesterday, and I'd seemed perfectly fine. Janet from shipping even walked over to ask if I needed anything, her weathered hands patting my shoulder gently. "I'm okay," I told her softly, though my hands were shaking slightly as I packed my personal items. "Just take care of yourself, Janet. Make sure you keep track of your pension statements, all right?" She nodded, not understanding the deeper meaning behind my words, but something in my tone made her promise she would. What Dennis didn't know, what nobody in that office knew, was that I'd been preparing for this possibility since the moment I'd first spotted the discrepancies 3 weeks ago. My background wasn't just in accounting. I'd spent 5 years volunteering with the Colorado Financial Ethics Advisory Board, helping small businesses implement proper oversight procedures. Through that work, I'd developed relationships with forensic accountants and federal regulators who specialized in pension fraud cases. More importantly, I'd learned to think like an investigator. The manila folder Dennis had dismissed so confidently was just a fraction of what I'd uncovered. The real evidence was stored on an encrypted drive that I'd been building methodically for weeks. Every suspicious transaction, every forged authorization, every attempt to cover his tracks. It was all documented, cross-referenced, and backed up in multiple secure locations. As I walked toward the elevator with my box of belongings, Dennis emerged from his office, probably wanting to make sure I actually left the building. He caught my eye and gave me that same condescending smile. "Monica," he called out, loud enough for half the office to hear. "I hope you understand this is for the best. Sometimes people just aren't cut out for positions of responsibility." I stopped walking and turned to face him. Every eye in the department was on us now, and I could feel the weight of their attention. For a moment, I considered telling everyone exactly what kind of man they were working for. But I had a better plan. "You're absolutely right, Dennis," I said with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Sometimes people really aren't cut out for positions of responsibility. Sure, just wait." The confusion that flickered across his face was deeply satisfying. That evening, I sat in my home office in my modest ranch house on the outskirts of Denver, staring at the cardboard box from my old job while I made the most important phone call of my professional life. The encrypted drive sat next to my laptop, containing enough evidence to potentially send Dennis to federal prison. "Patricia, it's Monica Delgado," I said when the forensic accountant answered. Patricia Wong and I had worked together on 3 different cases during my time with the ethics board, and I trusted her expertise implicitly. "I need to discuss a pension fraud case that's going to require federal involvement." "How bad are we talking?" Patricia's voice was all business, which I appreciated. $200,000 stolen from employee retirement funds over the past 18 months, possibly more, I said, pulling up the detailed spreadsheets on my laptop screen. "The perpetrator is the chief financial officer of a mid-sized manufacturing company, and he terminated my employment today when I confronted him about it." The silence on the other end told me Patricia understood the gravity of the situation. "Monica, you know I have to ask. Are you absolutely certain about these numbers?" "I've checked them 7 different ways," I replied, scrolling through the evidence I'd compiled. "The transaction patterns are clear, the authorization codes are forged, and I have documentation showing he created false vendor accounts to funnel the money through. This isn't a mistake or an oversight. This is deliberate, systematic theft." Patricia's sigh was audible through the phone. "Send me everything you have. Encrypted, obviously. And Monica, don't talk to anyone else about this until we've had a chance to review the evidence. If this is as clear-cut as you're describing, we're going to need to bring in the Department of Labor's Investigative Division." After I hung up with Patricia, I made my second call to Thomas Rodriguez, a Department of Labor investigator I'd met during a workshop on pension security 3 years earlier. Thomas specialized in cases involving retirement fund misappropriation, and he'd given me his direct number with instructions to call if I ever encountered anything suspicious. "Thomas, this is Monica Delgado from the Colorado Ethics Board," I said when he answered. "I need to report a significant pension fraud case, and I believe it falls under federal jurisdiction." "Tell me what you've got, Monica." As I explained the situation, I could hear Thomas taking notes. When I mentioned the dollar amount and the systematic nature of the theft, his questions became more pointed and urgent. "Monica, I need you to understand something," Thomas said after I'd finished my summary. "If what you're describing is accurate, this isn't just embezzlement. This is a federal crime that affects the retirement security of dozens of working families. The FBI is going to want to move quickly on this." I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. Dennis thought he could intimidate me into silence, thought my word wouldn't carry weight against his position of authority. He had no idea that I'd already set wheels in motion that he couldn't stop. "I understand completely," I told Thomas. "When do we start?" 3 days after my termination, I was sitting in a sterile conference room at the Denver field office of the Department of Labor, watching Patricia Wong walk 2 federal investigators through the financial evidence I'd compiled. Special Agent Rebecca Foster from the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division sat across from me, her sharp eyes focused on the spreadsheets covering the conference table like a general studying battle plans. "This is exceptional documentation, Monica," Agent Foster said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made people take notice. "Most pension fraud cases take months to build this level of evidence. How long were you tracking these discrepancies?" "About 3 weeks from start to finish," I replied. feeling oddly calm despite the surreal nature of the situation. Once I identified the pattern, it was just a matter of following the electronic trail. Dennis wasn't particularly sophisticated in covering his tracks. He seemed to think his position would protect him from scrutiny. Thomas Rodriguez, the Department of Labor investigator I'd contacted, leaned forward with interest. "What made you start looking in the first place?" "Our quarterly audit flagged some unusual withdrawal patterns," I explained, pointing to the timeline I'd created. The amounts weren't enormous individually, usually between $8,000 and $15,000, but the frequency was wrong. Pension fund distributions should follow predictable patterns based on employee retirement schedules and emergency hardship applications. These transactions didn't match any of our documented employee requests. Agent Foster exchanged a look with her partner, Agent David Chen. "And when you confronted your supervisor about these discrepancies?" "He terminated my employment within 24 hours, I said, unable to keep a slight edge from my voice. "Claimed I was paranoid and unstable, said nobody would believe me. Then he had security escort me out for alleged performance issues and confidentiality violations." "Classic intimidation tactic," Agent Chen observed, making notes in his file. "Discredit the whistleblower to undermine their credibility. Unfortunately for Mr. Caldwell, he doesn't understand how federal investigations work." Patricia looked up from the financial documents she'd been reviewing. "Monica, I need to ask about your access to these records. Were you authorized to conduct this level of financial investigation?" "Absolutely," I said firmly. Managing pension fund distributions was part of my core job responsibilities. I had full administrative access to the retirement account systems, and conducting quarterly audits was literally in my job description. Dennis tried to frame it as unauthorized access, but every search and every download was within my legitimate work scope. Agent Foster nodded approvingly. "That's crucial for the integrity of the evidence. And you said you have documentation showing false vendor accounts?" I pulled out another folder from my briefcase. "Dennis created 4 different shell companies with similar names to legitimate vendors we work with regularly. Goldthorn Manufacturing became Goldthorn Industries. Nexora Labs became Nexora Solutions. He was counting on the similarity to avoid detection during routine payment processing." "How much money total?" Agent Chen asked. "From what I could trace, approximately $230,000 over 18 months, I said. "But I suspect it goes back further. Dennis has been the CFO for 3 years, and I only had access to review records going back 2 years due to our document retention policies." Agent Foster stood and walked to the window, her expression thoughtful. "Monica, I want you to understand that once we move forward with this investigation, Dennis Caldwell is going to know exactly who provided the evidence against him. Are you prepared for the possibility of retaliation?" I thought about Janet from shipping, counting on her pension for retirement in 3 years. I thought about Carlos in maintenance, faithfully contributing to a fund that Dennis was treating like his personal bank account. I thought about all the employees at Gravora Group who trusted that their futures were secure. "Agent Foster," I said, meeting her gaze steadily. "Dennis Caldwell already fired me for doing my job. What more can he do to me?" 1 week later, I was consulting with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit when my phone buzzed with a text message that made my blood run cold. It was from Jennifer, my former colleague in the accounting department. "Monica, Dennis is telling everyone you stole money and they fired you for embezzlement. He's saying you created false documents to frame him. Some people are starting to believe it." Agent Foster noticed my expression change immediately. "What is it?" I showed her the message, watching her jaw tighten as she read. "He's trying to flip the narrative," she said grimly. "Classic deflection strategy. Accuse the accuser before they can gather support." "Can he do that?" I asked, feeling a surge of panic. "Can he just lie about what happened and make people believe it?" "He can try," Agent Foster replied. "But he's making another critical mistake. Every false statement he makes about you or this case is additional evidence of his consciousness of guilt. We're going to document everything. Over the next few days, the situation at Gravora Group deteriorated rapidly. Jennifer kept me updated through careful text messages, describing how Dennis had called an all-hands meeting to address rumors and misinformation about the company's financial management. He'd painted me as a disgruntled employee who'd fabricated evidence after being rightfully terminated for poor performance. But Dennis had underestimated something crucial: my reputation among my former colleagues. Most people aren't buying it, Jennifer texted me on Thursday evening. Janet from shipping asked pointed questions about the pension fund during the meeting. Carlos from maintenance said he wants to review his account statements. People remember how careful and honest you've always been. The real turning point came when Dennis made his most serious error yet. According to Jennifer, he'd announced that the company would be switching to a new pension fund management system to prevent unauthorized access to employee accounts. He was essentially admitting that unauthorized access had occurred while simultaneously claiming I was the one responsible for it. He's trying to plug holes in a dam that's already breaking, Agent Foster explained when I shared this information. The new system announcement is evidence that he knows there are vulnerabilities in the current system, vulnerabilities he created to facilitate his theft. Patricia Wong had been working around the clock to verify every transaction I'd identified, and her preliminary findings were even more damaging than we'd initially suspected. Monica. He wasn't just stealing pension contributions, she told me during a conference call with the federal team. He was also skimming from the company's matching contributions. The total theft is approaching $300,000. That changes the federal sentencing guidelines significantly, Agent Chen noted. We're now looking at potential charges under multiple statutes, including mail fraud, wire fraud, and violation of the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. But the most shocking discovery came when Patricia traced the money Dennis had stolen. Instead of finding evidence of gambling debts or personal financial problems, she uncovered something much more calculated. He wasn't spending this money on lifestyle expenses, Patricia explained, showing us bank records the FBI had obtained through court orders. He was investing it: stock purchases, cryptocurrency, real estate speculation. He was treating the pension fund like his personal investment portfolio. The cold calculation of it made my stomach turn. This wasn't desperation or addiction. It was pure greed. Dennis had systematically stolen from hardworking employees because he thought he could generate higher returns than the pension fund's conservative investment strategy. Agent Foster, I said, looking at the evidence spread across the conference table. When are you planning to move on this? She checked her watch. The warrants are being finalized now. We'll execute them tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., right when Dennis arrives at the office. I felt a dark satisfaction building in my chest. In less than 12 hours, Dennis Caldwell was about to have the worst day of his professional life. The morning of the raid, I wasn't at Gravora Group, but I didn't need to be. Agent Foster had arranged for me to monitor the operation from the FBI field office, where I could watch through live video feeds from the agent's body cameras and provide real-time guidance about the company's financial systems and document locations. At exactly 9 a.m., I watched on multiple screens as 12 federal agents in dark suits walked through the main entrance of Gravora Group. The receptionist's shocked expression was clearly visible as Agent Foster presented the sealed warrant to search the premises and seize financial records. "Where is Dennis Caldwell's office?" Agent Foster asked the receptionist, who pointed toward the corner office with a trembling hand. Through Agent Chen's body camera, I watched them approach Dennis's office. He was just settling in with his morning coffee, probably planning another day of covering up his crimes and spreading lies about me. When he looked up and saw the federal agents, his face went from confusion to recognition to absolute terror in the span of about 3 seconds. "Dennis Caldwell?" Agent Foster's voice was calm and professional. "I'm Special Agent Foster with the FBI. We have a warrant to search these premises in connection with an investigation into pension fund fraud." Dennis's coffee cup slipped from his hands, splashing across his mahogany desk and soaking the same financial reports he'd been reviewing when I confronted him 2 weeks earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me. There must be some mistake, Dennis stammered, his voice higher than usual. I don't know anything about pension fund fraud. This is about Monica Delgado, isn't it? I told you she was unstable. She fabricated evidence to get revenge after we fired her. Agent Chen stepped forward with the warrant paperwork. Mr. Caldwell, you have the right to remain silent, but we need you to step away from your computer and allow our forensic team to secure your electronic devices. Through the video feed, I watched Dennis's face cycle through emotions I'd never seen from him before. Panic, desperate calculation, and finally, defeated recognition that his carefully constructed lies were collapsing around him. The search of his office revealed even more evidence than we'd expected. In addition to seizing his computer and financial files, the agents found handwritten notes detailing his shell company scheme, including passwords and account numbers he'd apparently been too arrogant to properly hide. But the moment that satisfied me most came when Agent Foster asked Dennis about the missing pension funds directly. Mr. Caldwell, can you explain why employee pension contributions totaling approximately $300,000 were transferred to accounts under your control? Dennis's response was exactly what I'd expected from him. That's impossible. The pension fund is completely secure. Monica Delgado had unauthorized access to those systems, and she must have manipulated the records to make it look like I was involved. Agent Foster's expression didn't change, but I could hear the satisfaction in her voice when she replied, Mr. Caldwell, we have independent forensic confirmation of these transactions from the bank's own records. We also have documentation showing that you personally authorized each transfer using your administrative credentials. These aren't manipulated files, they're federal banking records. The silence that followed was deafening. Through the camera feed, I could see Dennis realizing that his lies were useless against documented federal evidence. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked genuinely small. As the agents continued their search, word spread throughout the office. I could see employees gathering in confused clusters, whispering among themselves as they watched federal agents systematically dismantling Dennis's world. Janet from shipping stood near the elevator, her face a mixture of shock and growing understanding. The man who'd called me paranoid and unstable was now being read his rights by the FBI while his office was searched for evidence of federal crimes. 6 months later, I sat in the federal courthouse in Denver, watching Dennis Caldwell face the consequences of his actions. The courtroom was packed with Gravora Group employees, many of whom had taken time off work to witness their former CFO's sentencing hearing. Dennis looked nothing like the confident, condescending man who'd fired me. His expensive suits had been replaced by a basic gray outfit. His face was gaunt, and his hands shook slightly as he stood before Judge Margaret Harrison. The federal investigation had uncovered evidence of theft, totaling over $400,000, far more than even I had initially suspected. Mr. Caldwell, Judge Harrison said, her voice carrying the weight of federal authority. You systematically stole from the retirement accounts of dozens of hardworking employees over a period of nearly 3 years. You violated the trust placed in you as a fiduciary, and when confronted with evidence of your crimes, you attempted to destroy the reputation and livelihood of the person who uncovered your theft. I watched Dennis's face as the judge continued, feeling a cold satisfaction as each word landed like a physical blow. Your actions demonstrate a calculated disregard for the financial security of others, and a willingness to victimize those who depend on their pension benefits for basic survival. The court sentences you to 42 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. You are also ordered to pay full restitution to the affected pension fund, plus penalties and interest. As the bailiff led Dennis away in handcuffs, he turned one last time to scan the courtroom. His eyes found mine across the packed gallery, and I saw the moment he truly understood what had happened to him. The paranoid, unstable woman he'd dismissed had systematically documented his crimes and delivered him to federal justice. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply met his gaze with the same steady calm I'd shown in his office that day, and watched him disappear through the courthouse doors. The aftermath of Dennis's conviction brought changes I hadn't anticipated. Within a week of his sentencing, I received a call from the Department of Labor's Office of Inspector General, offering me a position as a senior investigator specializing in pension fraud cases. "Monica, your work on the Caldwell case was exceptional," explained Director Sarah Matthews during our phone interview. "We need investigators who understand both the technical aspects of financial crimes and the human impact of retirement security theft. Would you be interested in making this kind of work your full-time career?" The irony was profound. Dennis had fired me for doing my job too well, and now the federal government wanted to hire me for exactly the same skills he'd tried to silence. I accepted the position immediately. My first case as a federal investigator involved a construction company in Colorado Springs, where the owner had been diverting pension contributions to fund personal real estate investments. The pattern was remarkably similar to Dennis's crimes, but this time I approached it with federal authority and resources. Meanwhile, Gravora Group had implemented comprehensive reforms to prevent future pension fraud. The new CFO, brought in from outside the company, established multiple oversight layers and mandatory auditing procedures. Janet from shipping approached me at Dennis's sentencing to thank me personally. "You saved my retirement," she said, her eyes bright with tears. "I was 3 years away from retiring, and if he'd kept stealing, I don't know what I would have done." That conversation made everything worthwhile. The stress, the confrontation, the temporary unemployment, even Dennis's attempts to destroy my reputation. Every challenge I'd faced had led to this moment, protecting working families from financial predators. As I walked out of the courthouse that day, I realized Dennis had been right about one thing. Nobody would believe his word, not anymore, and not against federal evidence. As I settled into my new role as a federal investigator, I often reflected on the twisted path that had led me here, knowing that Dennis's attempt to silence me had only amplified my voice in ways he never could have imagined.